it is somewhat sad that we are at the end of these 2-day workshops. It's been an incredible set of sessions and speakers and discussions. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us across the 2 days. I'm now really delighted to introduce Joseph Sikulu, who will provide some closing remarks for the workshop. Joseph is a Tongan man from Ha'apai and Vaini in Tonga Tapu. I'm sorry if I'm saying this incorrectly. He grew up in Daru country in Western Sydney, Australia, as it is known today. He's an environmental, cultural, and queer activist, finding his strength in the cross-section of these communities from people who are like him, are fighting to shift the narrative the world has on queer people of colour. Through his work, he is the Regional Managing Director in the Pacific for 350.org and serves on the Secretariat for the Pacific Climate Warriors. It is wonderful to have you, Joseph. Thank you so much for joining us today, even though I know you are a little bit under the weather. So thank you so much, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Georgina. Thank you for that introduction. I honestly came into this conversation just at the end while we were having those discussions, and I felt like I walked into the completely wrong room. Just the kind of things were happening, but I appreciate that I've been given some space and some time just to provide. I'm not sure what I can provide, but I guess I can just talk about some of the things that we do. Like Georgina said, my name is Joseph, and I am from Tonga in the Pacific Climate Warriors. So, malo lele, malo talawa mai if it's afternoon, I guess. I'm calling in from the land of the Direct people, and so I would like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Whenever I begin a talk or whenever I begin discussions around things, I always start with a few truths, acknowledging a few different truths. Firstly, that there is no justice in the climate crisis without a commitment to dismantling the systems of white supremacy that marginalize and destroy the lives of Indigenous, Black and marginalized communities of color. There is no justice for climate without addressing the systemic extraction, harm, and violence towards Indigenous, Black, and racialized communities. And around the world, Indigenous, Black, and racialized communities are the ones hardest hit by the climate crisis. Indigenous communities all over the world have long than anyone else risen to fight and protect their land, their oceans, their waterways, and the stories, the culture, and the livelihoods that are connected to them. And we know that it's the extraction and the destruction of Indigenous land that has accelerated the climate crisis that also threatens the homes and livelihoods of Indigenous people. I guess that's the reality for our people, and also the reason why we have to continue to advocate at every different level. We know that the climate crisis is a human rights crisis. Our rights to self-determination, to clean air, to water and the environment, and most importantly, our right to dignity. As our people continue to move through this world and this crisis, these things need to be protected. I'm a grassroots climate change campaigner, and so sometimes the conversations that happen in these spaces might go over my head, but in a way that I can explain it, we are being told that we have, one thing that we know is that we're being told that we just have a decade. That's what I was moving on towards today, is that we're being told that we have a decade for real ambitious action, that we have a decade to step up our ambitions, we have a decade to push governments and around the world to take bolder actions. After that, the damage is irreversible. But I was listening to this today, and the reality is the damage already is irreversible. Our people are in a constant state of recovery from the escalating climate crisis, from this pandemic, and I guess that's why these conversations are important, because we need to do everything we can to make UN mechanisms accessible as we can, to ensure that the stories that our people hold and the realities that they are living and facing on the ground reach the places that need to hear them. I caught the end of this session and I was a little overwhelmed by the level of conversation that was happening, mostly because of, I guess, the terminology. And I think that's why it's important for us to be working from the different levels and bring in the different pieces of work that we need to be doing and working together. One of the things I was talking about to our network just before I came into this space was the privilege that comes with our proximity to vocabulary. Access to language is one of those barriers that our people face all the time. It's what stops them from being able to engage in these processes. It's what stops them from being able to understand what's happening. And I think that's where we need to act as a bridge between what's happening at these levels and what's happening at the grassroots. My family, our neighbors, they're all environmental human rights defenders. And just as Georgina was saying, we do need to shift and change the broader narrative. What we need to ensure that we do is that these people and their communities see themselves as the environmental human rights defenders we know they are and we need them to be. And one clear way for us to do that is just to continue to be able to show up in each other's spaces as we do at the moment, to be able to engage, to be able to break down these communication barriers so that people, I appreciate these conversations and I appreciate the space and the work that happens there within them. And one thing I do more than anything look forward to is being able to, I guess, engage more in these conversations and engage more in these spaces with all of you in a way where I know my job is just to be able to uplift people on the ground and make sure that they have the tools and the resources they need to be able to show up in these spaces and in these works. And so I appreciate the space that has been created for me just to show up in here and just to be visible. And I appreciate all the work that you all have done because it's such an incredible thing. I don't think there is any way that we could, all layers of work need to exist within themselves. And so thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Those words are really powerful and resonate strongly. What you were saying about language and terminology is really important because, you know what, I think this happens in so many different communities in so many different ways that even when I speak to my colleagues who all work within the environment field, within the UN system, still some of the terminology that we utilize around, for example, the human rights mechanisms and the human rights approaches can be unfamiliar and unknowing. And so it's really important. You said it's necessary to raise awareness amongst our colleagues and our family for them to recognize that they are environmental human rights defenders, and so that they can be the environmental human rights defenders that we need them to be, so that we have a mass solidarity working towards a common goal. And I think that is important within so many different groups, and certainly even within the UN community, we're raising awareness of these interlinkages between human rights and the environment. We're building that that ability to be fluent in the language of human rights and the environment. But we need to do it in such a way that it is accessible, that we make these conversations accessible, and that we don't use terminology in such a way that it is a deterrent, because we're all working towards a similar end goal. And the other thing you said is that the climate crisis is a human rights crisis. And I would concur, it's a human rights crisis. It's also a child rights crisis. You know, as a parent, it's very, it can easy to become very despondent about the future that we are giving our children, our grandchildren, and all of the generations to come. And we, you know, I would like to think that those future generations can look back and see that we made a difference, and we moved the dialogue, and we ensured that environmental human rights defenders were able to undertake their important and their legitimate work that meant that they had a future that was sustainable. So thank you very much for those words. They were really powerful to me. And I would like to also add, on behalf of UNEP, as one of the co-hosts of this workshop, a huge thank you to OHCHR counterparts in the Pacific office. I know that our work certainly comes from a place of passion. I think we all have a shared sense of passion and urgency for the work that we do. But we also need to recognize that, for me, from a work perspective, this mandate also is derived from a joint memorandum of understanding that we have with OHCHR to collaborate on work of protecting environmental human rights defenders. And this workshop provides a really important platform for us to explore ongoing activities that OHCHR and UNEP will undertake under that MOU. We also need to acknowledge that the Secretary General of the UN has put out a call to action on human rights that requires all UN agencies to work together to strengthen the human rights system-wide approaches. And not only that, but specifically requires us to work on climate justice and the rights of future generations. And this is work that we are happily taking forward and advocating on. We recognize throughout the discussions of the last 2 days that it is clear that it is marginalized and vulnerable groups that are disproportionately affected when advocating for strong environmental and human rights protection. Therefore, it's important that as we go forward and as we continue to work in this area, that a special focus must be given to those who aim to protect the planet, especially in terms of environmental rights. We need to ensure the voices of Indigenous peoples, of women and girls, necessary respect and space within the decision-making processes. Also, harking back to my intervention in the last panel, we need to make a case for stronger environmental laws. We need to make a case for laws that protect and promote human rights and call on everyone here, of course, including ourselves, to work with governments and all stakeholders to ensure that EHRDs voices are included in the drafting of laws that will impact upon them. I also, as a closing remark, would like to thank all participants, moderators, and panelists for these really amazing couple of days. Thank you for attending all of the sessions. Thank you for giving us your time, as well as your thoughts. And we will produce an executive summary of the report, which we will share with all participants. We hope to continue to the discussions. We look forward to continuing to collaborate and to make a difference for all of us working across the Pacific to safeguard our environment. So thank you very much on behalf of UNEP, and I would now be very happy to turn over to my OHCHR counterparts for their closing words.
Thank you very much, Georgie, and to Joseph for such excellent reflection upon the past 2 days or past session, as well as an outlook from here on out. I think it really highlights the importance of collaboration and cooperation at all these different levels of not only environmental human rights defenders and the network, but also its partners. So I just want to sort of relay again a big thank you to our UNEP team, especially Georgie and Serbi, who had been excellent at really working with us in making this workshop possible. And of course, to all the moderators and the speakers and facilitators who had actually partnered with us in allowing such important topics to be discussed in the past 2 days. And also, I would like to relay a big thank you to our OHCHR team, Robert, our focal point for climate change and business and human rights, as well as Catherine and Joe for their excellent work in organizing this. And I think the biggest gratitude goes to all of you participants who had joined us for this workshop in the past 2 days. And it could not have taken place without your engagement and input. And reflecting on what Georgie had said, I have no doubt that we will be able to see each other again in the continued work of strengthening environmental and human rights protection of environmental human rights defenders, not only in the Pacific region, but also beyond. Thank you all, and that concludes our 2 days workshop.